Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
After Socrates, then there are various Socratic schools. So Socrates himself didn't start a school, but what happened was there were enough young minds that were listening to him, people like Plato and others who gathered around him, that they were disciples who went off and started sharing his teachings with others. Probably the most popular school is the School of Megara. Euclid of Megara, not to be confused with Euclid the mathematician, but Euclid of Megara was one of the early disciples of Socrates. And since the Megarians were prohibited from entering Athens, what did Euclid have to do to be able to enter Athens? He dressed like a woman to come through the city gates. He'll talk with Socrates, talked with Socrates, and then got dressed up again and left. The Megarians were not allowed in Athens. The School of Megara told us that the One is known by many names. How interesting. Last week we were talking about that, how it is that we were coming up with this concept of the One from which everything comes. Everything comes from the One with the capital O. And so it's this, the Megarian school, the School of Megara, which said that the One is known by many names. It's known as the Good. It's known as God. It's known as reason. How interesting this Socratic school at Megara believed that multiplicity and plurality are illusory. So remember last week all those arguments that Zeno had against motion and change, and saying that those were illusion? They're going to say the same thing about multiplicity and plurality, that everything is one. There is no plural, there is no plurality, there is not many. An idea of many, false idea. Plurality, false idea. The example that he used is of 1 grain of corn. Okay, we're going to create a heap of corn here. I put 1 grain of corn on the table. Is that a heap? No. Okay, I'll put another grain of corn. Is that a heap? Not yet. Okay. At what point, I'm going to keep adding a grain until you say it's a heap. Are we going to be able to agree when that's a heap? So for him, it was an argument of how it is that plurality is impossible, all is one. Other conundrums, try to think through these. The School of Megara came up with this conundrum. That which you have not lost, you still have. If you haven't lost it, then that means you still have it, right? I have the marker in my hand. I haven't lost it. If I haven't lost it, that means that I still have it. So far, so good? Okay. You haven't lost horns. Therefore, you still have horns. Anything that you haven't yet lost, you still have. I haven't lost the marker. Therefore, I still have it. I haven't lost horns, so I still have horns. Be careful. I don't have horns. Right? One of their conundrums. Another conundrum. Electra knows her brother Orestes. So Electra knows her brother Orestes. But Orestes is now dressed in a disguise, so Electra doesn't know Orestes because he's disguised. So Electra doesn't know what she knows. She knows her brother, but her brother's disguised, so she doesn't know her brother, so she doesn't know what she knows. That was the School of Megara. Another early Socratic school was the Cynic school. The Cynics, have we heard of them? Antisthenes turned the negative of Socrates' abstemious nature into positive. So Socrates is very abstemious. He abstained from drink and abstained from food and wore that same coat all year round in the winter and in the summer. Antisthenes saw this as a positive. You know how it is that we need to be ascetics like Socrates. Let's leave behind earthly pleasures and live like Socrates. You know, he's going to be abstemious as well, not fasting, denying the body its pleasures. He also denounced traditional religion, opting for one god over multiple gods. Greek religion, Greek mythology, we had many gods. He didn't believe in many gods. He had one God. He said, by convention there are many gods, but by nature, how many gods are there? Only one. By convention, we create many gods, but how many are there? There's only one God. Going to be in line with our monotheistic tradition. And the last Socratic school, the Cyrenaic School. The Cyrenaic School said that pleasure is the goal of life. How different that was from the previous Cynic school. The Cynics were denying themselves all sorts of pleasures. The Cyrenaics, whoo-hoo, bring on the fun. Pleasure is the goal of life. Why are we here? We're here to have fun. Bodily pleasure over intellectual pleasure. Though the wise person is going to avoid unrestrained excess, the wise person is going to recognize that, we can't have those pleasures all day long, every day. The wise person is going to have some restraint, but pleasure is the goal of life. Democritus of Abdera. Democritus suggested that pleasure and pain determine happiness, and happiness is the end of conduct. So the way that we act is essentially we act so as to have happiness. What determines happiness? Pleasure and pain. The less pain and the more pleasure, the happier you'll be. He said happiness dwells not in herds or in gold, in things you can have. The soul is the dwelling place of happiness. Where's happiness going to be found? Inside. Ooh. The best thing, he said, for a person is to pass life so as to have as much joy and as little trouble as possible. Interesting. Goes back to pleasure and pain, right? The more pleasure you have and less pain, the more joy you'll have in life. He also said the good and the true are the same for all, but the pleasant is different for pleasant people. In the search for universal definitions, the good and the true, those can be agreed upon by all, but happiness is this thing that's going to be different for different people. Pleasure, some people are going to find pleasure in some things, others are going to find pleasure in other things. That was Democritus of Abdera.